Journalist Richard Dudman spotted a police officer and a deputy sheriff. An agent joins them. He removes a bullet and pockets it.
Okay, and according to your Warren Commission testimony, you saw where a shot had hit the turf on the south side of Elm Street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said that the shot had caught the manhole cover at the corner?
The concrete of the manhole cover, yes.
Secretary Marilyn Sitzman, on the morning of the assassination, joined her boss, Abraham Zapruder, an enthusiastic home movie maker, on the grassy knoll. His film of the passing motorcade was to become the most detailed and gruesome record of the president's death.
We were looking around to see where would be a good place to be. And he looked here and he said, well, this standing up here would be a good shot. But he said, I got vertigo and I can't stand up there by myself. Would you stand behind me and hold on to me? I said, sure, why not? So he gets up here, I get up behind him, and I'm holding on to him. And he started filming about, just before they came around the corner. And we're filming, they come around the corner and start coming down and they're, you know, waving at everybody. And then we heard what to me sounded like 2 firecrackers. You know, it was starting to get a little confusing because you could see things happening in the car and you didn't quite get what was happening until they got right here in front of us and the third shot hit Mr. Kennedy right in his head. We knew what happened. This harrowing footage, after examination by the FBI, was immediately purchased by the publishers Time Life and locked away from public scrutiny. Were it not for photo analyst Robert Groden, who gained access to the original and worked on it secretly, its real significance may have remained hidden forever.
We had been told that the president had been shot from behind, from the Texas School Book Depository. If that had happened, he would have been thrown forward, the transfer of momentum of the bullet striking him in the rear of the head. But what we saw was the exact opposite. When he was struck, he was thrown to the rear and to the left, indicating a shot from the grassy knoll. The knowledge that we had been lied to scared me. Yeah, I felt if anybody knew what I knew, that I'd be in a great deal of danger. So I didn't tell anybody. I quietly worked on the film for years. The more evidence that I was able to develop in the film, for instance, the timing of the shots, when the first shot was fired, which was a lot earlier than the Warren Commission had told us, at a point when Oswald, had he been up in that window, could not have fired the shot, until the most frightening, horrifying physical aspects, the nature of the wounds to the president's head, which are visible in some frames after the headshot, much clearer than anything the public has ever been allowed to see. Living with that became a horror. Trying to keep that, afraid of being discovered that I knew that, that's what frightened me the most.
The Warren Commission ignored the film evidence of a shot from the front. They were also selective in their choice of eyewitness testimony. 2 members of the Willis family told them of hearing shots fired from behind the president's car. However, other vital evidence they tried to offer went unrecorded.
The implication was persuading, yes, ma'am, because all they wanted to know was 3 shots that probably came from the depository building, which I never have doubted. That's about all they wanted. That about all got into the Warren Commission, really, that I heard 3 loud shots from a Texas depository.
The headshot seemed to come from the right front. It seemed to strike him here, and his head went back, and all of the brain matter went out the back of the head. It was like a red halo, a red circle with bright matter in the middle of it. It just went like that. It was a terrible time. You cannot imagine seeing this. You knew it happened, but you didn't want to believe it.
The particular headshot must have come from another direction besides behind him, because the back of his head blew off, and it doesn't make sense to be hit from the rear and still have your face intact. So he must have been hit from another position, you know, possibly, you know, in the front or over to the side. I really don't know where. But the back of his head blew off.
So I am very dead certain at least 1 shot, including the one that took the president's skull off, had to come from the right front. And I'll stand by that to my death, over my mother's grave.
Several witnesses attest to hearing shots fired from the grassy knoll area of Dealey Plaza, and evidence proves that the intelligence agencies pocketed a .45 caliber bullet at the scene of the crime. This must indicate that there was a third shooter involved, and as was proven earlier, Connolly was struck by 2 bullets before ducking into the back seat of the car. There had to have been shots fired from the right side of the president. Vital evidence proves this, as well as more attempts by the government to disregard this fact and try to make evidence obsolete.
Connie Kritzberg was a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald on November 22, 1963. A couple of hours after the assassination, she did a phone interview with 2 of the principal doctors who had tended Kennedy.
I talked to Dr. Kim Clark, who was head of neurosurgery at Parkland Hospital, and Dr. Malcolm Perry. So I asked, how many wounds were there in the president? And I was told Dr. Kim Clark said there was a gaping wound in the back of the head. And Dr. Perry said, the wound I was working on was an entrance wound in the neck. And I asked him where it was located. I asked him, was it below the Adam's apple? He said, yes, it was in the midline, in the front of the neck, below the Adam's apple. And he said 3 times that it was an entrance wound from the front. And so I wrote a very simple story, only about 12 inches long as we measured stories, and turned it in.
The next morning, Connie found the story she filed had changed.
I found in the story, in about the 3rd paragraph, there had been a very unprofessional sentence inserted. It said, a doctor admitted there was possibly 1 wound. So I was very upset. I called the city desk and I talked to one of the assistant city editors whom I respected quite a bit, and I said, who changed my story? Who put in that sentence? And he immediately knew what I was talking about. He said, the FBI. A story couldn't be printed that there was more than 1 shot and that 1 came from the front. It had to be altered, no matter how crudely, to conform to the official story that there were 3 shots from 1 place, from 1 man, and it was only 1 man who committed the murder.
Confirmation of what Connie was told by Dr. Perry comes from one of his colleagues who also attended the fatally wounded president at Parkland Hospital, the late Dr. Charles Crenshaw.
Prior to the tracheostomy performed by Dr. Perry, I observed in the lower third of the neck a small, rounded, well-demarcated entrance wound. This was obliterated by the tracheostomy in that Dr. Perry made the tracheostomy incision through the entrance wound. Different parts of the tissues were spread. He then made the incision into the trachea and through the hole that had previously been made by the entrance of the bullet. The tracheostomy was put in place.
The government continues to be haunted by the discrepancy between the wounds the autopsy photographs show and what the Dallas doctors actually saw.
In the late 70s, the House Select Committee on Assassinations looked at the evidence of the Kennedy assassination. And one of the most disturbing things about that evidence when they looked at it was the fact that there were a team of doctors where Kennedy had been taken right after he was shot in Dallas. These are Dallas doctors who were experienced in trauma who had said he had a hole in the back of his head. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was trying to say that Oswald had done it, and with a hole in the back of the head, if you're being shot in the back and the bullet blowing out in front, that doesn't fit. So the House Select Committee reported that it had refuted the Dallas doctors. The Dallas doctors all got it wrong because they had better witnesses. Their witnesses were the witnesses that were there in the morgue during the autopsy. And they said that 26 witnesses that they'd interviewed all endorsed the autopsy photographs showing the head wound up here. None of them agreed that there was a wound back here.
There is no medical evidence that President Kennedy was hit from the front and to the right.
But they didn't let us see the interviews. They didn't let us see the documents that these people had prepared. In fact, they were scheduled to have been suppressed until 2028. When the documents tumbled out in the mid-1990s, lo and behold, The autopsy witnesses, who the House Select Committee had interviewed, said the same thing the Dallas doctors did. The hole in the head was back here. They drew diagrams showing a hole in the head back here or back here, and it became very apparent that the House Select Committee had just interviewed these people, suppressed their testimonies, and then misrepresented them in their report.
The forensic pathological panel simply says that if he was shot out from the front and to the right, the shot missed.
The doctors who were supposed to evaluate the medical evidence for the House Select Committee assassinations never saw these suppressed interviews where not only were the Dallas doctors saying there's a hole in the back of the head here, but so were the morgue witnesses saying there was a hole in the back of the head. So it was a complete abomination. It was perhaps the most dishonest thing that was ever done, and it was apparently done to keep Oswald as the central figure in this scenario.
But he was not. Oswald worked for the CIA and the FBI and was obviously part of a plan. Oswald was never caught red-handed and proclaimed his innocence thoroughly. I am certain that it is within the code of conduct for the CIA to eliminate any of its agents that are exposed in the field by any governments that threaten to expose them. It is also to my belief that if a CIA agent is an important asset, they will also fake their death to the public so that they can get away with the crime and eliminate the one responsible. I personally believe that many deaths were faked after the JFK assassination. However, there is still crucial evidence indicating that there was more than one shooter. So the questions that we need to find answers to are, who were the hitmen, how many were there, and where were they located? There was at least 5 shots fired that I can count, 3 from the front and side, and at least 2 from the back.
And I walked up to the car where Mrs. Kennedy was still there on the back seat, lying there with her head bowed over, covering her husband's head, his blood running down her leg and on her clothes, and twice saying, "They've murdered my husband. They've murdered my husband."
My first thought was, they got him.
I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. My God, they're going to kill us all.
And I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. And I said, oh my God, they're going to kill us all.
All this talk about they.
And then I said, my God, they're going to kill us all.
And we still don't know.
Jacqueline Kennedy stayed close to her husband's casket during the 2-hour and 20-minute flight back to Washington. And she stayed close once Air Force One landed at Andrews Air Force Base, still wearing her blood-stained clothes. Let them see what they've done, she said.
He fired Alan Dulles, longtime Director of Central Intelligence, General Cabell as deputy. And it's interesting to recall that General Cabell was brother of the mayor of Dallas at the time President Kennedy was killed.
And John Kennedy's words when he fired him were roughly along these lines, that if this were England, I would have to go. But this is America, and you have to go. Well, General Cabell never forgave him for that, especially for causing the end of a brilliant intelligence career. And you can't help but feel that that's not totally irrelevant to the subsequent events when John Kennedy attempted to drive in an open car through the town where General Cabell's brother was mayor.
The Dallasites kept saying it just can't be true. Mayor Earl Cabell, as he rushed away from the hospital.
Mayor, I would think that the feeling is that in the broad moral sense at least, that all of us share in what has happened here today, but this city, as you say, is not a city where things like this are done. The minority, it's a loud one, and today, this tragic thing that happens really once in a lifetime.
This is a guilt that doesn't belong to a few. This is a guilt of the nation. We're all responsible.